Greetings once again. I am Jazir Bey. This is the second episode of Two-Faced Gemini. And for this episode, I would actually like to talk about name correction. All right. So I said I'm Jazir Bey, but for people that have known me before I started calling myself Jazir Bey, they know me by a different name. All right. And if you can go on my Facebook, you can see that. Now, I know some of those people are looking at it like, why did he change his name? Just like Mos Def changes his name to Yasin Bey. I mean, I'm pretty sure most people know that he wasn't born Mos Def, right? That was his stage name. But he started calling himself Yasin Bey. And at the time, I also thought that was different, strange, unique. I didn't completely comprehend why he did that. Later on, I knew why he did that. And actually, when you look at his situation, he was holding on to this information for quite some time. It's just he decided at that point in time, it was like enough is enough. I can't, withhold the truth anymore. I can't keep hiding from it. So, he made that public declaration. But back to me, my situation, and for many other situations, other people that have made what you see as a name change, for those that are, let's just say, for the lack of a better word, educated, right? And this episode is really going to get into like the linguistic aspect of it because it's really a name correction. All right. Now, I know some people who even have made what you see as a name change or corrected their name and, maybe completely go by a different uh, way of calling themselves. And they will have a L or Bay or Ali at the end of what they decide to call themselves. Now, for some of those people, they would just say name change because most people, that's how they comprehend it. But, for this podcast, right, it's not just to be politically correct, so you got to forgive me because the challenging part is going to have to be the balance, me speaking colloquially and me speaking denotatively. All right. And so, the linguistic part of me is always like, speak denotatively, speak according to what the words actually are defined as. Defined meaning as being in a particular definition, which does not change, right? According to the colloquialism or the connotative speech is what the word was intended to mean from its inception, right? So that goes into etymology. So when I say name correction, it's not a name change. And now we're going to get a little bit political, right? Because when you look at name change, you're still taking a political stance that is with one of the very same people who you deem to have oppressed you, right? If you have the same complexion skin as me, or even if it's lighter or darker, or you're going by African American, African, whatever your, your political classification has been, which really are misnomers, right? I mean, these are all classifications that have come from the very same people that, my people or people that look like me have deemed that has oppressed them, have put them through slavery, have put them through a system that is racially motivated or systemically there to oppress them, right? So, there's a lot of things that actually go into this name correction, quote unquote, name change kind of thing. Whereas you're making this declaration that you no longer go by a particular name, a name that was given to you at birth, and you're going by this quote unquote name, right? Because really they're not names, they're appellations, right? And the difference between an appellation and a name is that an appellation is a title, or it's something that can evolve and change over time because human beings were not just you know, set in stone, so to speak, right? Names were reserved for things that, you know, don't change. Like this is a jar, right? A glass jar. What else do we have? This is a bell. These are things that we name in which they're not going to change over time, or else it'd be very hard to communicate if you decide to call this something else, just because it's a Tuesday or whatever, and you want to just change the name of it. So we're not inanimate objects. We are human beings. We are people. We are spirits having a human experience. And throughout our human experience, we can evolve, we can change, we can add attributes to ourselves. And so an appellation is something in which you have a particular attribute that's assigned to you, whether it's at birth or whether it's at a particular point in time in which you decide to, either acquire those attributes. Like if you're in a pursuit of those attributes, you first have to claim it. Even if you think that you don't have a particular attribute, but you desired it, you have to claim it. And then you will actually go through the process of, you know, bring that, manifesting that into of a more physical manifestation, if you will. Right. So appellations, they are completely different than names. And when you look at the etymology of the word name, it comes from no men, no men. Now, what does that sound like to you? You know, it's a little bit of wordplay here. I don't like to do this all the time because, it could be pretty ambiguous, right? But no men, it sounds clearly like no men, like NOMEN. That's actually how you spell no men, all right? In terms of where this word originally, what it dates back to, etymologically speaking. So it's telling you in the actual etymon that is not to be applied to no man or no men whatsoever, because men, human, they are not inanimate objects. They don't have names. They have titles. They have appellations. And even when you look at the names that people have today, they are actually appellations. They are actually titles. They are not like I said, they're not like Glass. Like you don't meet a person and their name is Glass, right? Maybe a person's last name is Glass, right? But that would come from, and many of the last names, they actually come from people's occupations, like Smith, blacksmith, right? But in terms of people's names, right? Whether it's John, Mary, or so. When you look at what these names mean, they all have a particular name, right? It could mean like beautiful, courageous, um, hardworking, whatever that particular name means. God's child or God's savior, whatever the case may be, right? Which those are actually titles, right? They're appellations, just like, officer would be a title. If you want to look at more noble, like king, queen, god, goddess, whatever, however you want to look at it, these are all things that are titles, and so that's what an appellation is. So even with your name, quote unquote name, whatever your name is, John, Jane, Mary, whatever it is, that's actually an appellation. Right? Unless it's some kind of like made up name or some kind of use named after some inanimate object like rock or something like that, then that's a little bit different. But nevertheless, you should look at it as being an appellation because you're not the same from when you were born, right? You go through situations and it makes you a particular way. Hopefully, it makes you into a more positive person, or you start to acquire different things. Maybe you've gone through situation and it took a lot of courage, right? Jazir actually means courage. So it took a lot of courage for you to go through those situations. So then at the end, you receive that title, Jazir, right? Let's just say that for instance. Or maybe you want to accumulate courage, and so therefore you add that to your appellation. But also be aware that you are going to go through situations that also have to attribute to that appellation because when you hear that appellation being called, or that name being called in conjunction with you, there's a certain resonance that's going to happen, right? Which is going to have a particular vibration, and we all know everything in the universe is vibration. And when you vibrate at a certain way, it's going to attract things that are on the same frequency, right? Because vibration is dealing with frequency, so you're going to attract that situation or those things at that particular frequency, because that sound is going to resonate with you, because that's how you decide to call yourself, or that's just how you were, quote unquote, named at birth. So when people say that to you, it's going to attract those situations, circumstances, and whatnot. You ever notice how, if you're like sleeping, but you're not like really into deep sleep, or you could even be into deep sleep, but you're kind of like on a borderline of, sleep and up, like, you're just tired, you're laying on the couch, you can hear background noise, but it's not really enough to like disturb you, because you already have been, uh, let's say, used to that, just going to sleep. You hear noise, but you're just still like in between, sleeping and being up. But then you hear something fake in the background. It's getting louder and louder and louder. And say, that's my name. And you wake up, right? Right? Because that name appellation has a certain frequency that you're choosing to vibrate with. Okay. And so that's what, wakes you up. That's what gets you up. So you see what I'm saying with the vibration and the frequency thing? It does definitely play a part into the situations, the circumstances that you go through in life. So be aware of that. Words have power, they have meaning. As it says in the Bible, and forgive me because I'm going to paraphrase this probably. In the beginning, there was a word, and the word was God, right? So it's through words, how you manifest things into your life. So that's why you always got to be careful about, the kinds of words that you use. And I'm more careful about the words that I use. I have to catch myself at times. And it can be quite challenging when you're talking with people and you're speaking colloquially, because when you speak in a particular kind of way, people may look at it as like different or strange, or you're not telling the truth. But that's when you get into belief and you see the word lie and belief, you have to lie to yourself in order for you to get to a higher vibration, especially if that is coming from a belief system that you're trying to change from before, right? A belief system that really doesn't serve purpose for you anymore, right? And a lot of the belief systems that we have are, kind of like negative belief systems, and really belief systems that they really don't serve any purpose. Like, what's the point in believing that we have been slaves for 400 years? And factually, when you look at the facts, that's not it's not verifiable information. It can't be logically looked at as being factual, hardcore evidence that we were slaves for this extended period of time, and 10 million of us were transported from Africa to the Americas, by these slave ships carrying about 400 slaves per ship, traveling across the Atlantic on a 3-month voyage with barely any access to drinking water or enough food to last, to even last 20, 30 people that long. I mean, to even do this by today's standards is very, very tough challenging task. I mean, I challenge anybody that's watching or listening to this. Tell me exactly how can you transport 400 people on these wooden ships? It's not with today's technology. I mean, we're talking about technology from over, 400, 500, 600, however many years ago, right? Transporting 400 people on a ship to carry enough clean water, because you're not drinking out the Atlantic Ocean, to carry enough clean water and enough food to have at least the majority. of these people survive, right? Because I mean, if you're looking at the slave trade as a profitable business, what good is it if your product, essentially, which would be slaves, what good is it if your product, goes bad before you arrive to its destination? That's like if I'm trying to transport some food to somebody in mass quantities, but I don't have a way to preserve that food on a long voyage. And before I get there, most of it dies. That's a terrible business plan, business idea, and it's definitely not profitable, right? So, I don't want to get so far into the politics about it, but it's important because, this name correction that I did has a lot to deal with the political stories, the history that was told to us as a means to, in a sense, oppress us, right? To keep us oppressed, right? And your freedom from that oppression is to just not believe in it because it's unbelievable. I know for some people, they're like, don't want to believe that that is a lie, right? They just want to believe in that. And I mean, that's perfectly fine. I'm not trying to change your beliefs. This episode is really just about me clarifying why I corrected my name. All right. But I'm challenging anybody to watch that was watching this, listening to this, bring forth some substantial evidence that proves that 10 million slaves were brought over from Africa to the Americas. And even when you say the word slave, right? And I have to elaborate on this because this episode is about etymology as well. That's not even true. Like we can't be slaves etymologically speaking. I get it when you look at slaves connotatively speaking, you talk about indentured servants, because that's actually the denotative, that's a correct phrase to label what, a good majority, of us or our, ancestors, we definitely were indentured servants at some point in time. But so were the so-called white people. Right there, if there's a book called White Cargo, right? You can go check out that book, and there are actual ship logs about people, the so-called white people, right, that were taken from other places in the world that were also involved in the slave trade. So I'm not denying that there was no slave trade that was happening, but because I mean there were quote unquote slaves from the Americas, from Africa, from Europe, all in that general region area, that yes, they were being transported, right? Because that is a business. That is even still going on to this day in terms of, slavery. In some countries like Morocco, slavery is still illegal. It's still legal, right? So yes, it definitely happened, but not to the degree and how what people think. And with the word slaves, I don't want to, digress too much from, explaining. The word slaves, it means Slavic, right? So Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, right? These Slavic states, those, that the word slave denotes to the people in those Slavic states that were actually indentured servants, right? They went through hardships, right, as well. What you think slavery is, that's where the word comes from, because they were going through a time in which they were in forced servitude, not getting paid. Right? I remember to this day when I was in China, I had some friends from Russia, and I was using WeChat, Chinese social media platform, and I remember seeing a post from, one of my friends from Russia. She was saying how, I guess she hadn't got into some kind of argument with so-called black woman or whatever, and she was saying how, yeah, and we were the first slaves. So I don't want to hear that slavery stuff, something like that. I just remembered that she said we were the first slaves. And at the time, I wasn't into the same amount of knowledge that I'm into now. I was looking at that like, "What? Like, what you talking about? Like, yo, you sounding crazy right now." But then later on, as I came into the information, I realized that she was right. They were the first slaves because, from Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, like all that particular region, that is actually what a slave is. So when you get into the international realm, when you start talking to people, not as the typical American, where, when they watching American news media and they're seeing people talk about American politics and they talk about, yeah, we were slaves for 500 years and black people and all this kind of stuff. And they see you and they know you from America, they're going to talk to you like English, colloquially, because a lot of times English is not their first language, so they don't give a damn, what they're saying in English. They don't give a damn about being absolutely correct, but they know the difference. They know the difference when they are translating the word from their language to the other, and they say, "Well, what is actually the direct translation of this word?" And then when they have when they hear the conversations happen, they say, "Okay, well, instead of using the direct translation, because most of the people don't even use that direct translation, let me use the colloquial because I want to sound like an American. I want to sound like how they're speaking to each other, so I can engage in the conversation and not be the weird one because I'm actually speaking how I'm defining the words literally from my native tongue to the English language." But when you speak to people on an international platform in a realm and you actually come to them as an educated, and I'm going to use that word educated because educated means animal husbandry, but as a person with erudite degrees in knowledge, you're very knowledgeable about what you're speaking on. Then they will reveal to you, it's like, oh yeah, I know that, right? I remember talking to my friend from Egypt, and shout out to Matt. Talking to my friend from Egypt. I've known him for, quite some time. I met him actually when I was living in China, right? And I've been to China twice. I was living in China from 2014 to 2016, and then also I went back in 2018. 2014 and 2016, I'm talking to my friend Matt, and, I'm using the same terminology that most of my people here in America are using. Black people, white people. Oh, that's the stuff white people do. Da, 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 da. Later on, when I came back to China and I met up with Matt in 2018, and I said, "Matt, I realized I'm not black." And you know what he said? "Yeah, I knew that." I was like, "You knew that?" He's like, "Yeah, I just didn't know how to tell you because, that's just the way that y'all speak over there in America." But most other people in Egypt that are quote unquote educated or have higher degrees of knowledge, they know that about you, you know, that about y'all over there. It's just, but that's just the way that y'all speak. So we're not going to, like, how can we correct you guys? Because if we try to correct you, you're going to tell us that we're wrong and we don't know what we're talking about. Right. And he didn't say all of that, but I can tell from the conversation that we were having that that's the stance, that's the attitude that not only he has, but a lot of other, international people have as well that actually have, and I'm just going to use the word education, all right, for shorthand. So I'm speaking colloquially about, with that connotatively. A lot of people that are educated around the world, they have this information, but it's not up to them to educate you. It's up to you to educate yourself. Because just because you graduated high school, college, you got your bachelor's, your master's, and even your doctorate, that doesn't mean that the knowledge, that's it. It's over and done with. Because knowledge keeps going and going and going and going. And maybe you're not a person in a particular field that will have access to this information, right? Maybe you're just completely engaged into health and wellness, right? Or finance, right? And you have your doctorate in that. And you don't have this particular knowledge and you don't spend your time acquiring this knowledge. That's why it's up to people like me and other people who are linguists, well versed in linguistics, to teach you, for you to know. And at least for you to trust us, at least, because I'll tell you one thing as well. Linguists run the world, not bankers, not, people who have access to, military weapons and whatnot. It's really the linguists that run the world. And the reason why I say that, me being a person who definitely interested in linguistics. I've been interested in linguistics before I even knew that it was called linguistics. But the people who are linguists also are bankers, also are the people that have access to weapons of mass destruction, are the people that write the speeches for the people that you see on TV that hold particular positions of authority, let's say. Right. So they're not always in your face about it. A lot of times they're behind the scenes, doing the work in terms of linguistics, using the right words, the words that can get the people excited or get the people to think something else, right? Knowing that the people are not really well versed, they don't really know where words come from. They could use particular language and whatnot in order to tell you the truth without even really telling you the truth, right? So it becomes really kind of twisted, when you are just only speaking colloquially or connotatively. I know that just because you speak English doesn't mean you know English, right? Like most people don't even know that more than two-thirds of the words in the English language actually come from French. All right. And I remember when I was actually seeking to get my master's in linguistics at a theoretical linguistic program, I was taking in class and we learned something, and this was actually before I was getting my master's in linguistics. This was still when I was like actually getting my bachelor's in English, in I think advanced English or grammar class, and we learned something along the source that there is a linguistic foundation. I think it's in France, right? Which they if there's a question about the validity of a word or the definition, the meaning of a word, this particular group of linguists in this society or organization, they deliberate and determine, okay, what is actually the exact definition of this particular word, right? So, and they do a lot more than that, but most people don't know that, right? Because that's not something that is just going to be clear as day for the average person, right? Or people don't even care. Like, they hear the word, they hear it in a particular that's used in a particular context, several times, and so they just think, okay, this is what it means, and so they use it like that just because they hear this person use it, who's a person who's in a position of authority, or another, a group of other people use it. And so they're just gonna assume, okay, well, it must mean what it means like that if they keep using it in a particular context. But that's not always the case. And the only way you will know that is by actually looking up the etymology of the word itself to trace back its root. So that requires, some diligent study. And the unique thing about, words and etymology and how a lot of the words that we use in English, they don't actually have the definition that most people think that they have. Like for instance, black people. First of all, when you look at it in a humanitarian sense, it doesn't make sense to label person as a color because what is a color? And color is an adjective. It's not even a noun. It doesn't even denote a person, place, or thing. It's an adjective. It has to exist. A noun has to exist in order for that adjective to be applied to it, right? So when you say person, person is not even it's not even a human being, right? Because a person is a corporation, right? McDonald's is a person, Walmart is a person. This doesn't mean that each person is actually a living, breathing human being. All right. So, this name correction thing, there's a lot more to it. I mean, I could go even deeper into the politics about it, the linguistics about it, the spirituality about it, and whatnot, the history of it too, as well. But maybe that's reserved for another episode. This one is really just letting the people know that, yeah, I made a name correction, but if you know me by my previous name, doesn't matter. You can still call me that. I mean, I still have people call me that. People in my family call me that. My line brothers from my fraternity call me that. All right. So, it's not a big deal. But in the public, it is taking a political stance by making the declaration that, hey, I realized that this particular name that was assigned to, that was given on the birth certificate, first it becomes a Christian name, and not Christian in the sense in which you're saying, you're a Christian because you align with the core principles of Christianity. No, it's more so taking a political stance of Christianity. You're aligning with the particular groups, the same groups that you would look at and say, this is a terrible group. This is a racist group, a hate crime group. The same groups that you will look at it like that, by saying that you are taking the Christian name, you're also aligning with those groups or agreeing that you belong underneath those groups, because those groups carry also the same names, family names that you have accepted. By accepting the family name that was given to you. Because, right, most of us have grown up believing in the African slave trade story and whatnot. And so, if you go to Africa, you're not going to meet people with the name like Smith, with Harrison or whatever your family given name was. So, what makes sense is that those are names that come from, let's just say, a European name, whether it was Germany or France, Italy, or any other European country, or Ireland, Scottish, right? Those are family names that come from there, right? And even some of those family names are actually Moorish, right? Like the MC names like McFarlane and whatnot. I believe those are Moorish, but nevertheless, there are those that are just come from uh, Roman counterparts, right? Which I'm not talking about the Holy Roman Empire, but what comes after that in terms of, what you would say so-called white people, right? So to attach to that name, to hold on to that name, is also to state that you are property of said people, right? I mean, let's just think, right? Let's just go back to, let's just imagine this African slave trade. They're taking Africans and say, oh, I want that one right there. Okay, so just let everybody know that you belong to me. Your last name is Smith. Whatever your last name was, or whatever your appellation was, because remember, we had appellations before, we started just saying we had names. Whatever you was calling yourself, amongst your people, doing all that stuff, your last name is Smith. So that lets everybody knows, oh, when you say to people, oh, I am da 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 Smith, people know, oh, they belong to the Smith family. So let's not mess with, that. He's already, you know, been purchased, let's just say. I mean, isn't that the way that they would let other people know, like, hey, this person possesses this other person? I mean, just make it make sense, people. Make it just really simple, really logical for you to understand. So, how do you actually break free and take a really strong political stance and state that I no longer belong to the very same people who have took my ancestors, have raped them, have murdered them, have lynched them, have burned them, have done all kinds of horrendous acts to them. How do I separate myself from that? You correct the name. And it's not to say that you ever have to get rid of the name. You're never going to get rid of it because when that birth certificate was created, when they put your foot stamp on there and they filed it, you never see it again, and they're never going to show it to you again because it's definitely a liability. It shows that you were the grantor on the estate, and I'm not going to get into that. But yes, that right there is saying, okay, I correct it, and by correcting your name, I'm making that correction by stating that is not actually who I am inherently. Going back to the ancient principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Going back to my ancient principles of my forefathers and foremothers before before a time in which we were indentured servants. We were actually kings and queens, just like we want to claim that we are all the time. We were actually kings and queens and of noble status, right? Going back to that time, I mean, come on, we our people. When you look at how they built Al Andalusia, how they built what is now called Spain today. I mean, you think our people were just stupid and just walking around in Africa, "Ooh, ooh," like just throwing spears and whatnot? You think that's just all what our people were doing? No, I mean we built up whole civilizations, whole empires, not just kingdoms, but whole empires. So when you correct their name, you are actually attaching yourself to that part of the history that is noble. All right. And you don't ever have to get rid of that name. I still keep that name because all of that work, all of that energy that has been produced, that has been, put forth using that name, right? That just can't just die off because energy doesn't die off anyway. But you have to make the connection to show, hey, all of that energy that was I put in for all those years of my life. Yeah, I made the name correction, but I am this X rel that X relation that. So it's never gonna go away. That's why it's just a name correction. It's not a name change. That's part of the reason why it's a name correction and not a name change because you're not actually changing your name. You're not going to change from one Christian name just to go to another Christian name. You're just going to change from a Christian name or correct the Christian name and correct it to have an appellation. Even if it's the same name, quote unquote name that was given to you at birth, but with the L or a Bay at the end, or Ali or at the end. How you want to do it with noble titles that actually ties you to the land because every nationality on the planet has a surname that attaches them to the land that they're from. And I mean, you have to even believe that you're American to begin with. Most people don't like to say that, of our people, most people don't like to say that they're American until they're somewhere internationally and to avoid them getting into trouble or, being treated kind of like, let's, for the lack of a better term, a third world person. They say, oh, I'm American. But yet, when you're in America, you're not American. You're all of a sudden you're Africa. You need to go back to the motherland. You're African American, even, which that doesn't make sense because no other nationality calls themselves. Well, I mean, look, you have Italian Americans and whatnot, but I mean, no other nationality calls themselves Europe American, Asian American. I mean, I guess they do, but they would say Chinese American, Japanese American, more specifically. But even then, they know that they're Japanese. They know that they're Chinese. Granted, like that's where uh, their mother and father are both Japanese or Chinese. But even if they're born here, they are American nationals because American national is a particular political classification. Doesn't have to even deal with your bloodline because that's the different nationality and bloodline is similar yet different. So, I mean, that's a whole nother podcast. But you see, this name correction thing can go into so many different directions in terms of the politics, in terms of the etymology, the education, linguistics, in terms of the spirituality, right? And claiming, your actual, um, what your soul is yearning to claim for, right? But, that's a challenge for a lot of people, especially because, it calls for them to really analyze the beliefs and belief systems that they had for so many years, right? That's really, really challenging for people to challenge, their own belief systems that they have for so long. But I ask you, has it served you in the best way? Have has it served you and your own people in its best way? Do you feel like your people are where they should be, even though slavery has been over since 1865? It's been more than 100 years. I mean, we're almost up to like 200 years now being out of slavery. Chinese people were slaves in World War II, which happened in the 1940s, 1950, or 1940s. And look at where they're at now in less than 100 years. You know, they was going through indentured servitude when the Japanese were invading China. They almost completely took over all of China, right? And look what they did. And it's been well over 100 years, and look where we're at now, politically, financially, economically, socially, right? And we tell ourselves we're these amazing people, we're kings and queens and gods and goddesses and all this kind of stuff. And there's people that don't call themselves kings and queens and gods and goddesses that have made such advanced social and economic progress way more than we have. Ask yourself, why is that? I know why, but do you know why? Anyway, but yeah, that's concludes this episode here. Name correction. You don't have to do it, but I would look into it. All right. I'm just explaining to you my situation. All right. Why I corrected my name. All right. So peace and love to you all. I'm Jazir Bey. I'm out.